There are so many things that we've been doing under this project, both at country level and then also at regional level. And as I said, the main thing is actually about our connections to the country partners in Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So there is an element of research, particularly around what is the private sector and the communities are working together on, and what has been the discussions around the gaps within LGBTQI people within the private sector.
We had engagements with the Asian Development Bank on discussions on how to be more LGBTQI inclusive. And towards that, we were able to participate in the Idaho commemorations at the Asian Development Bank.
Ramil from APCOM had a visit to the Asian Development Bank and met with several of the social development specialists, and we discussed entry points for SOGIE inclusion into our operations at ADB. I hadn't ever come across anyone working on SOGIE in terms of our work. Ramil was really keen to learn about how the ADB actually did development across the region, and so out of that we came up with different ways in which we could collaborate together. We were probably dealing with that very much at the surface level. We weren't really digging deep into what the issues might be. So one of the really exciting things that APCOM did was that they conducted some research in 4 different countries, and that was really exciting when they came to the bank and they presented that work, because we really started to understand what might be the different issues, and also in different countries, the way that they affected people quite differently in different countries.
And then we had pilot projects which were implemented by our country partner organizations in their respective countries. These pilot projects aim to engage some private sector players in their own countries, awareness raising, discussions around how can they move forward, how can this private sector who were reached and engaged be more LGBTQI inclusive.
As following, we conduct a radio talk show. 2 radio talk show, 1 radio talk show on economic situation of LGBTQI person in COVID-19. So we want to raise awareness about economic situation and also the needs, demand for them in COVID-19.
In bridging LGBTQI group with private parties, we conduct a series of webinars. There is 7 webinars which present private parties as a resource person in these activities.
We develop a SOGIE module for inclusion as well as documentation process, like video that describes basic LGBTQI access, such as employment and access to health.
We produce the policy brief for the private sector to advocate and dialogue with the private sector, and also we try to generate the evidence on HR policy to advocate with the private sector and the government in Laos.
First, we conducted an in-country research on the situation of the LGBTQI community in the Philippines. We aim to present the state of social and economic inclusion for LGBTQI Filipinos. And we presented the different aspects, particularly on education, workplace inclusion, access to health and financial services. For our pilot project, we worked on developing a module for SOGIE-esque well-being and inclusion in the workplace.
In Cambodia, normally we discuss about rights, and this is a private sector. We also conduct SOGIE workshop with the creditors. We reach out and have a meeting with Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and some private sector to introduce the project, to have a discussion, to find out if there are any collaboration and entry points.
Those who are willing to become resources, once we offer ideas about inclusion in the world of work, they were interested in sharing existing good practices. They are not only a resource person, they are also interested in collaborating with the LGBTQI community in the future.
Under the finance inclusion project right now, we are targeted to work with the private sector we selected 5 private sector in Laos to work with us to promote sexual orientation and gender diversity. And also we try to encourage the private sector in order to supporting LGBT people in the workplace.
For the research, we consulted and we asked people from the private sector to participate to show us an overview of what LGBTQI individuals in the private sector are experiencing right now.
For APCOM and for myself, the success under the financing project is actually about our much closer connections with the country partners. And at the start, none of us really have the plans or ideas about how to tackle and engage with the private sector, particularly in countries that are hostile to LGBTQI people, or there's not many businesses that are really looking at engaging with the communities on the ground. So basically we are working together to learn and how to look at strategies in terms of ensuring there is inclusion and voices in the private sector.
Another success, the pilot projects. Our country partner organizations were able to do the pilot projects in engaging some businesses in the respective countries on discussions around SOGIE, SC, and LGBTQI inclusion.
There are 5 main achievements. One is about LGBTQI community organization. They participated and engaged with the project activity, and they start discussing on economic empowerment, how it is important for the acceptance and find out entry points in the private sector.
We managed to bridge members of LGBTQI communities with the representative from the private sectors. We managed to provide space in which members of LGBTQI communities could be learned about examples of inclusive policies carried out by small size to medium size private companies, and the other way around, that representative from the private companies could listen to what they can do to be more inclusive from the perspective of LGBTQI communities members.
Through this initiative, we are proud to all the representatives from private companies who are willing to cooperate with us in the future in supporting our works to push for inclusion in workplace. We also receive appreciation from our partners regarding the research report on LGBTQI workplace inclusion that we publish.
I think the most successful under the finance inclusion is we can structure the relationship between CS and the private sector in Laos in terms of the inclusion policy and also the supportive policy to support LGBT community in Laos.
We are happy to have produced the in-country research because this is something that has been very valuable in our advocacy work. We are also proud to have been part of APCOM's engagement with the Asian Development Bank. We are happy to have been there during the meetings with the ADB headquarters, and we were happy to have been part of the first Idahot celebration of the Asian Development Bank.
Of course, one of the biggest achievements of this project is that we were able to develop replicable modules that our partner LGBTQ organizations can use in engaging private companies and other institutions in the private sector.
Lots of challenges. First, as I said earlier, this is something new. APCOM and our country partners do not have that in-depth experience of engaging the private sector and the finance sector on LGBTQI inclusion. So at the start, and even until the end of the project, this has been a very good learning. It has been a very fruitful learning experience for APCOM and our country partners.
Of course, COVID-19 is the really challenge for us this day, because when COVID-19 comes, we cannot do any activities physical. So we have to start the new ways. We have to start to do like online.
Our main challenge is to find a private companies that are willing to work with us, an LGBTQI organization. It's hard, and since the talks on LGBTQI inclusive workplace is somewhat new in Indonesia, we need to use a number of strategies to approach the private companies.
The private sector in Laos, they have never been working with the CSO before, so many of them still not interested to work with us. However, they are still have some company that they are interested to support LGBT, even they don't have the HR policy for LGBT inclusion, but anyway in the action they still have some point, and also they still have some interesting idea to support LGBT in terms of LGBT inclusion.
The biggest challenge in implementing this project would be the global health pandemic, COVID-19. Since it limited the mobility of the organization and our supposed private company partners, we had to adapt our implementation to holding online events only. And APCOM has been very responsive by giving us trainings in holding online events.
Advisory group for Finance Inc., which I'm a part of, operates in a traditional way for advisory groups. That is, every step of the way, the team at Finance Inc. shares important documents with us, project documents that they want us to review, to provide inputs to. We have regular meetings throughout the course of a year to give them guidance, and it's different kinds of people coming from different backgrounds. Myself, from development institutions. I know there's a friend of mine from the academic institutions who's on the Finance Inc. advisory group as well, and others, civil society, for instance. Bringing those experiences to provide information, to provide guidance to the project in terms of where it's going and how it's doing things. So that's how the advisory group works, hand in hand with the Finance Inc. team.
I'm honored to be invited to serve as advisory group members. I think we come from different backgrounds, but one thing that I can ensure that we have in the commonality that we have together, because so each advisory committees bring these expertises and knowledges, and to ensure that the Finance Inc. Activities can be developed and implemented and bring greater result at the end of the project.
It was great to be involved as an advisory board member in this project, because we had the opportunity to hear very directly about some of the things that people in the project were learning as they pursued the project. Secondly, we had a chance to talk a little bit about strategic arguments to use when working with these different stakeholders, and we tried our best to be helpful in identifying people that could be approached to build relationships with. I think that's one of the things that I think those of us who have worked in this area broadly around working with employers recognize that if you can identify real people who are in these institutions and engage them in conversations that can help them see how important these issues are and what they need is for them to take some action.
I think there are a number of ways for organizations to become more LGBT inclusive. So it starts from the very simple notion of respect for diversity and inclusion. So one thing that we always share with organizations is to not make assumptions. Do not make assumptions about your staff, do not make assumptions about your customers, and think about the diverse organizational staff as well as customers that you are serving.
Private sector is a very key catalyst, very key stakeholder in all this, because private sector is actually about LGBTI people, because you have LGBTI people who are business owners and the like as employees, but also the correlation with the fact that you have employees and you have supply chains where LGBTI people are also found. And that sort of inclusion formally invites substantive inclusion in terms of respect for their rights, respect of their participation, as well as action against discrimination.